It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the air feels too calm, like it's holding its breath before something goes wrong. I was in my front yard, sipping my coffee, admiring the brand new cedar fence I'd spent 2 weekends building. The wood was still fresh, golden brown, smelling faintly of pine and hard work. It wasn't just a fence to me, it was a symbol. A boundary I'd earned after years of saving, working double shifts, and finally buying my dream home in a small, neatly organized, suburban neighborhood called Maplewood Grove. That's when I heard the sirens. They were getting louder and fast. 2 squad cars turned the corner and screeched to a stop right in front of my house. I remember thinking, who could possibly be in trouble this early? Then the officers got out, and they started walking toward me. "Sir," one of them said, his tone polite but serious, "we received a report about an illegal structure on this property." I blinked. "Illegal structure? What are you talking about?" Before the officer could answer, a voice sliced through the air like nails on a chalkboard. "I told you he wouldn't listen. That fence is a violation." There she was, Karen, our self-appointed HOA queen, standing across the street in her pastel cardigan, clutching a clipboard like it was a sword of justice. She had her phone out, recording everything, her lips twisted into that smug little smirk that made my blood boil. I stared at her, stunned. "You called the cops? On my fence?" "Oh, it's not your fence," she shot back. "It's the neighborhood's property, and you can't just do whatever you want around here. There are rules." The officer looked between us, confused. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. We can't." But she cut him off. "No, it's a safety hazard. It blocks visibility. It violates Section 4B of the HOA design guidelines." I was speechless. The fence wasn't even close to the road. It wasn't blocking anyone's view. It was built exactly along my property line, the very same one that the HOA had ignored for years while other neighbors' fences leaned like drunks at a bar. But here she was, calling the police over a fence. And as I stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and nosy neighbors peeking through curtains, a strange calm washed over me. Because in that moment, I decided if she wanted a war, I'd give her one. And this time, I'd make sure my fence was legally untouchable. Thanks for watching. 3 months earlier, life had been peaceful. I'd moved to Maplewood Grove for one reason: peace and quiet. After 20 years in law enforcement, all I wanted was to retire in a place where the loudest sound at night was the crickets. My daughter Emily loved the backyard, and my dog Max finally had space to run around without bumping into traffic or sirens. When I first met Karen, she seemed harmless. Her smile was too wide, her perfume too strong, and her questions too many, but she acted neighborly enough. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, handing me a basket of muffins that tasted suspiciously store-bought. "Just so you know, I'm the HOA president. We take pride in keeping Maplewood Grove perfect." I thanked her, thinking it was just small talk. I didn't realize that perfect meant under her total control. Over the next few weeks, little things started happening. A bright orange notice taped to my mailbox paint not HOA-approved color. Another one on my door, lawn height exceeds 3 inches. And one more unregistered lawn ornament. Please remove gnome. At first, I laughed it off. I figured it was a misunderstanding, or maybe Karen was just overzealous. But it became clear pretty quickly that I was being targeted. Other houses had mismatched mailboxes, taller lawns, and more gnomes than I could count, yet none of them had warning slips. Then came the issue of the backyard fence. The property line between my house and the common area was marked only by an old wire mesh that had rusted through years ago. I wanted something solid, something that would keep Max from wandering off and give Emily a little privacy when she played. So I did what any responsible homeowner would do. I filed a request with the HOA. 2 weeks passed. No response. I sent another email. Nothing. I called. Still nothing. Finally, I went to the HOA office, where I found Karen sitting behind the desk, tapping away on her laptop. "Hi, Karen," I said politely. "I sent in a request about building a fence behind my property." She looked up, blinking slowly, like I had interrupted something sacred. "Oh, that. Yes, I received it. Any update?" "Well," she said, closing her laptop, "the HOA board has decided to table your request indefinitely." "Table it?" I asked. "Why?" She smiled, that same tight smile again. "We just don't think a fence is necessary for your property. It might ruin the aesthetic flow of the neighborhood." I felt my jaw tighten. "But other homes have fences." "Yes, but those were approved under previous boards," she said, tilting her head. "And we've since updated our design standards. I'm sure you understand. I didn't. But I didn't argue either. I just went home, grabbed my tools, and built the fence anyway. It took me 10 days, 10 long, sweaty days. Every plank measured, every nail driven with care. I made sure it followed the local zoning laws to the letter. I even had the property surveyed to confirm I wasn't crossing any lines. The day I finished, I stood there with Max beside me, proud of what I'd built. The yard finally felt complete. Until that Tuesday morning when Karen showed up, arms crossed, lips pursed, glaring like I'd committed a crime against humanity. She pointed at the fence. "You can't do that." "I already did," I said, trying not to smile. She gasped, like I'd just confessed to stealing government secrets. "Then I'll have no choice but to take this to the board." "Go ahead," I said. I followed all the laws. She stormed off, muttering something about neighborhood standards and reckless homeowners. I didn't think much of it until those sirens came 3 days later. Now, standing in front of my house with cops and cameras, I realized she'd taken it to a whole new level. The officer sighed. "Sir, this looks like a property dispute. We're not taking any action right now, but maybe you can contact your HOA for clarification." Karen was fuming. "Clarification? He broke the rules. He's mocking the entire community." The officer gave her a tired look. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter." She opened her mouth to argue again, but then I said something that made her freeze. "Actually, officer," I said, pulling a folder from my pocket, "I already contacted the county zoning department. Would you like to see the permits?" Karen's smirk vanished. "Oh yes," I continued, flipping the folder open. "Every measurement, every code, every inspection approved and stamped by the county." The officer nodded. "Then you're in the clear, sir." Karen's face went pale. But I wasn't done. Because what she didn't know yet was that I had one more move planned. Something that would make sure she could never touch that fence again. Not legally. Not ever. And when she found out, her jaw would drop. But that's a story for the next chapter. Turned it up, Rast. Turned it up, Rast. It's not it It's not Armani. It's not it up, Rast. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. For the next few days after the police showed up, things in Maplewood Grove felt off. Neighbors, who used to wave at me while jogging, suddenly avoided eye contact. Kids who played near my yard were now pulled away by whispering parents. It didn't take long to realize that Karen had already spread her version of the story around the neighborhood. The one where I was the rule-breaking troublemaker, trying to ruin everyone's peace. I didn't respond. I just kept mowing my lawn, watering my flowers, and walking Max like nothing had happened. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know that silence often speaks louder than arguments. But Karen wasn't used to silence, she was used to control. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my door. It wasn't the usual printed HOA letter. It was hand-delivered. On the front, in big red ink, were the words, "Final Notice." Inside, the letter read, "Dear Mr. Thompson, the Maplewood Grove Homeowners Association has reviewed your recent property modifications and determined that your new fence violates Section 4B of the HOA design standards. You are hereby instructed to dismantle and remove the fence within 14 days, or face daily fines of $250 until full compliance is achieved. Regards, HOA Board signed by Karen Whitfield, President." I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because of how wrong she was. The fence didn't violate a single thing in state law, and that was what mattered. But Karen didn't care about the law. She cared about control. Still, $250 a day was a threat I couldn't ignore. I decided to pay a visit to the county records office the next morning. The lady at the front desk, a kind woman named Lydia, looked over the letter and shook her head. "If your fence is built within your property line, there's not much your HOA can do. Do you have your land survey?" I handed it to her. She nodded, running her finger along the boundaries. "Everything looks perfect. You're well within your rights." That's when she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "But if you want to make it completely untouchable, there's one thing you can do: file for a zoning exemption." "A zoning exemption?" I repeated. She smiled. "It means your property, and everything on it, becomes legally recognized under county jurisdiction, not the HOA's. Once it's approved, the HOA can't force you to remove or alter anything, not even a fence. It's rare, but it's possible." "Chloe." I stared at her, stunned. "You mean, I could make it so they can't ever touch it?" "Exactly," she said. "Once it's approved, your fence is yours forever." I thanked her, filled out the paperwork, and submitted my request that same day. It cost a small fee and a trip to the county inspector, but I didn't care. If this was what it took to stand up to Karen's nonsense, it was worth it. Meanwhile, Karen kept pushing. She sent 2 more notices. Then she started calling. When I didn't pick up, she came knocking literally. The first time, she stood at my door holding a clipboard. Her lips pressed so tight they were almost white. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "your continued noncompliance is unacceptable. The board will escalate this to legal action if necessary." I stayed calm. "Karen, I've filed everything through the county. I suggest you talk to them before you send another letter." Her expression cracked for a moment, just a flicker of confusion, then returned to that fake smile. "Oh, I will," she said. "And when I do, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned sharply and marched down my driveway. Max barked once, as if to say goodbye to her ego. For a few weeks, things were quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that usually meant something was brewing. And I was right. One afternoon, I was coming back from the grocery store when I noticed 2 men in bright orange vests standing by my fence, measuring and taking photos. I parked my truck and walked over. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them looked up. "We're here from the HOA Compliance Division. We're documenting the structure for review." "Under whose authority?" I asked. "President Whitfield's request," he replied. I nodded slowly. "Well, she forgot to tell you something important." The man frowned. "And what's that?" I smiled. "This property is now under county jurisdiction." I handed him a printed copy of my zoning exemption, freshly approved and stamped by the county office just 2 days before. He read it, his eyes widening. "Oh, well, that changes things." "It sure does," I said. "Now you can go ahead and tell your boss that this fence isn't just legal, it's untouchable." The men nodded awkwardly and left without another word. That night, as the sun set over Maplewood Grove, I sat on my porch with Max at my feet, watching the light turn the fence a warm shade of gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace again. But peace never lasts long when Karen's around. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of loud arguing outside. Neighbors were gathered around my front yard. Karen stood in the middle of them, waving a piece of paper in her hand. "This isn't over," she shouted. "He might think he's above the rules, but I'll prove he's not." The neighbors murmured among themselves. Some looked uneasy, some looked curious, and some, the ones who'd had their own run-ins with her, looked secretly amused. I stepped outside, calm as ever. "Morning, Karen. Trouble sleeping?" Her eyes blazed. "Enjoy your little victory, Mr. Thompson. You'll regret it soon enough." She stormed off down the street, her heels clicking like hammers on the pavement. I didn't know it yet, but that threat wasn't just talk. Karen was about to take things to a level I never imagined, and this time, it wouldn't just be about the fence. The morning after Karen's ominous departure, I woke up to the soft hum of birds and the smell of fresh coffee. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. I walked outside to check the fence, and Max followed, wagging his tail, unaware that a storm was quietly brewing. For a few hours, the neighborhood was calm. Kids rode bikes down the street. Neighbors waved as they left for work. And the sun reflected off my perfectly aligned cedar panels. I allowed myself a small sense of victory. The fence was officially untouchable. I'd done my homework, followed every law, and now I could finally enjoy a slice of peace I'd been craving for years. Then it happened. A loud thump echoed across the yard. I froze, heart racing. Max barked furiously and ran to the edge of the fence, growling at something I couldn't yet see. I ran toward the sound and discovered that Karen had left a massive, tacky banner draped over my fence. In bright, unreadable neon letters, it read, "Rule breaker, HOA violation, watch out." I blinked, trying to process it. It was childish, ridiculous, and insulting all at once. But that was Karen. She always preferred dramatic gestures over reasoned arguments. I walked toward the street to find her standing there, hands on her hips, glaring at me like a hawk spotting its prey. "There," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "Now everyone will see what you're doing. You can't hide behind your legal loopholes." I sighed. "Karen, it's still my property. The county approved it. Your theatrics don't change that." Her lips twisted into a scowl. "It's not over, Mr. Thompson. Not by a long shot." I went inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and thought about how to respond. I didn't want to escalate this into something ugly, but Karen wasn't stopping. Her banner was more than a sign, it was a challenge. For the next week, things became a subtle battle of wills. Neighbors whispered. Kids threw sideways glances as they biked past. Mail carriers were clearly uncomfortable delivering packages. And Karen? She continued her silent campaign of intimidation. Flyers in mailboxes, emails to the HOA complaining about my disruptive behavior, and even showing up at community events to glare at me like I was some sort of villain. But every time she tried, I stayed calm. Patience was my weapon. I smiled, waved, and treated everyone, even Karen, with basic kindness. I knew that reacting angrily would only make me look like the troublemaker. My goal was simple: outlast her drama and protect what was mine. Then one Friday evening, the extreme event arrived, unexpected and terrifying. I was sitting on the porch with Max when I noticed smoke curling above the fence. My stomach dropped. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the backyard, expecting maybe a barbecue accident or someone burning leaves. What I saw made me freeze. The edge of the fence was charred, black smoke curling upward, and a faint smell of accelerant lingered in the air. Someone had tried to set my fence on fire. I yanked Max back and called 911. Within minutes, firefighters arrived, quickly extinguishing the small blaze before it spread. The damage was minor, just a few burned planks, but the message was clear. Karen's tactics had escalated from passive-aggressive stunts to something dangerous. The fire department asked if I suspected anyone. I shook my head, though my mind raced. Could it really be her? Or someone else trying to cause trouble? They took my statement and told me to secure my property. I spent the rest of the night reinforcing the fence, installing motion sensor lights, and checking the locks on every gate. The next morning I received a notice from the HOA, not about fines, not about violations, just a cryptic email. We noticed that certain issues have occurred at your property. Consider this a warning. I smiled quietly. Karen had no idea I had made the fence legally untouchable. She could rage, threaten, and even try sabotage legally. She couldn't touch it. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. Still, I knew this was far from over. The fire was just the first strike in what would become an ongoing battle of wills. I had protected the fence, but now I had to protect my family, my peace, and the neighborhood's sense of safety. And in that moment, I realized something important. Life isn't about controlling others, it's about controlling yourself. Every act of kindness I showed, every calm response I made, was a quiet victory, one that Karen could never understand. As I closed the door that night, Max resting his head on my lap, I thought about the journey ahead. There would be more stunts, more threats, and more neighborhood drama. But for the first time, I felt ready. The final words of the day echoed in my mind. This battle wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about standing up, staying calm, and never letting someone else's anger dictate your life. The morning after the fire, the tension in Maplewood Grove was palpable. Neighbors whispered in their yards, glancing toward my house as if expecting the next disaster to strike. Emily stayed inside, drawing quietly at the kitchen table, while Max circled the living room like a tiny, furry security guard. I knew I had to address the situation before it spiraled further, but I also knew that reacting impulsively would play right into Karen's hands. That's when I received the email from the HOA, a mandatory neighborhood meeting scheduled for Friday evening at the community clubhouse. Karen had highlighted it in bold red letters, practically daring me to attend. I spent the next few days preparing, not with anger, but with facts. I printed copies of the county's approval for my fence, photographs of my property line, and documentation proving the fence was fully compliant. I wanted to show the neighbors that my actions weren't reckless or selfish. They were lawful, responsible, and considerate. Friday evening arrived. The clubhouse was packed, with neighbors murmuring and passing whispered comments back and forth. I could see Karen at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, practically glowing with anticipation. Her eyes locked on me, sharp and accusatory. It felt like walking into the lion's den, but I reminded myself to stay calm. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, her voice unusually loud for a room filled with murmurs. "We are gathered here because some residents have chosen to ignore the HOA rules, which undermines the integrity of Maplewood Grove." The room went quiet. I knew exactly who she was talking about. I stayed seated, calmly sipping water, waiting for the right moment. Karen's speech continued, filled with exaggerated claims about safety hazards, unauthorized structures, and neighborhood aesthetics. Each statement made the crowd murmur, some nodding nervously. It was clear she was hoping to pressure me publicly, to make me look like the villain. Finally, she turned directly to me. "And that brings us to Mr. Thompson's fence. It violates Section 4B of the HOA design standards, obstructs visibility, and sets a dangerous precedent for other residents." I stood up, my voice steady, and addressed the room. Neighbors, I want to clarify a few things. First, this fence is entirely on my property. Second, it complies with all county zoning regulations. Third, I obtained official approval before construction, which makes it legally untouchable by the HOA. Murmurs spread through the room. Karen's face went pale for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked it. That may be your interpretation, but the HOA board disagrees. It's still an eyesore. I smiled calmly. The county doesn't consider it an eyesore, and I'd like to remind everyone that following laws, protecting property, and ensuring safety are far more important than personal preferences about appearances. For a moment, there was silence. Some neighbors seemed impressed, while others looked confused. Karen fidgeted, clearly unsettled that her plan wasn't working as expected. Then, one of the neighbors, Mr. Jensen, an older gentleman with a quiet voice, spoke up. I've looked at your property and the fence, and frankly, it seems reasonable. I don't see the problem here. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patel, nodded. I've walked past it every day, and it's neat and well built. This meeting feels like personal drama rather than a community issue. The room's atmosphere shifted. Karen could feel the momentum slipping from her control. She tried to speak, but voices began overlapping, neighbors questioning her repeatedly. Why are you targeting one person? Is this really about the fence or something else? Karen's attempts to regain authority were desperate. She slammed her clipboard down, but by now, the tension was clear. The neighbors were not entirely on her side. When the meeting concluded, Karen stormed out, muttering threats about legal escalation and HOA rules. I stayed behind for a moment, speaking quietly with a few neighbors who thanked me for being calm and respectful. Some even admitted they were relieved to see someone stand up to Karen without losing composure. As I drove home, I reflected on the events of the past few weeks. The fence had become more than just a barrier between properties. It had become a symbol of standing firm, of responding with patience rather than anger, and of showing empathy, even to those who act aggressively. But I also realized that Karen wasn't finished. The fire, the banners, the threats, they were just the beginning. Her actions had escalated, and now she would be looking for her next move. I knew I had to be prepared for whatever she tried next, but I also felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. I had faced her publicly, without losing my temper, and gained the support, if quietly, of my neighbors. That night, I sat on the porch, Max at my side, watching the sunset paint the fence golden. It was beautiful, peaceful, and untouchable. But deep down, I knew the calm wouldn't last long, because Karen was already plotting. The days after the neighborhood meeting were strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. I had hoped the meeting would calm things down, but deep inside, I knew Karen's pride and obsession with control wouldn't allow her to give up so easily. I spent the morning tending to my garden. The sun shone brightly, and Max ran around chasing butterflies, completely oblivious to the tension that lingered in the air. I watered the flower beds, trimming the roses with care, and tried to enjoy the simple pleasure of a peaceful day. For a moment, I even imagined that perhaps Karen had finally given up. But by mid-afternoon, I began noticing subtle changes around my property. A few plastic flamingos had mysteriously appeared on my lawn, not near the fence, but in places that made them unavoidable to anyone walking past. They weren't dangerous, but they were clearly intended as an annoyance. Then I noticed tire tracks in the mulch along the side of the house, too heavy to be from normal gardening equipment. Someone had driven very close to my property line. I called the neighbors I trusted, quietly asking if they had seen anything unusual. Most of them shook their heads, but Mrs. Patel mentioned seeing a car idling near my house a few evenings before. She didn't recognize the driver. It felt like someone was observing my home, studying it, and waiting for the right moment to act. That night, as I sat on the porch, a low sense of unease crept in. Max lay at my feet, his ears twitching at every sound. I watched the streetlights flicker and imagined Karen, plotting her next move. She couldn't touch the fence legally, but she had clearly moved into a more psychological approach. Harassment, intimidation, creating discomfort without crossing any actual laws. The next morning, the first act of the silent siege arrived. I opened my mailbox and found another envelope. This one unsigned, containing only a single sheet of paper. In bold letters, it read, "You think you're safe, but we're always watching. Nothing lasts forever." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just passive aggression. This was an attempt to instill fear. Whoever was behind it, and I suspected Karen was escalating from annoyance to intimidation. I called the police to document the note. They assured me it was still a civil matter unless someone physically trespassed, but they encouraged me to keep a record of everything. I did exactly that, creating a folder on my computer and a physical binder with dates, photos, and copies of every incident. Every banner, every letter, every flamingo, and every suspicious note went in there. Over the next week, the harassment became more subtle but relentless. My trash bins were moved slightly, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be considered vandalism. The garden gnomes, which I had bought in secret to cheer up Emily, kept disappearing from their spots, only to reappear hours later in odd places. My lights would flicker at night, and once, I found an old toy car placed deliberately against the base of the fence, with Max barking furiously at it, as if sensing a trap. Through it all, I maintained composure. I kept smiling, waving to neighbors, and treating everyone with kindness, even Karen when she occasionally drove past. I had learned something important. Aggression often loses its power when it is met with calmness and dignity. But then came the next extreme event, one that made the subtle harassment feel like a prelude to something much darker. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped outside to check the fence. Max trotted behind me, sniffing the grass. That's when I noticed it. The fence was shaking violently. Someone was trying to force it down. I froze, staring at the wood bending slightly under pressure. Before I could react, a figure darted away into the shadows. The fence held, but the stress on the planks was obvious. My heart pounded in my chest. Whoever had done this knew the fence was untouchable legally, yet they had tried to physically damage it anyway. I called 911 immediately. Officers arrived within minutes, surveying the area, shining flashlights, and asking questions. They couldn't find the person, but they noted footprints in the dirt, footprints that seemed deliberately misleading, scattered to confuse anyone following them. As I secured the fence again, reinforcing the posts, I realized the game had changed. Karen's tactics had escalated from passive-aggressive harassment to direct, dangerous sabotage. She couldn't destroy the fence legally, but she was clearly willing to take risks to scare me and assert control. That night, I sat on the porch with Max at my feet, looking at the fence illuminated by the new motion sensor lights. It stood tall and untouchable, but the shadow of fear lingered. I knew that the next move would be bigger, more shocking, and perhaps something that would test my patience and courage more than anything yet. The silent siege had begun. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far everyone is following this story. The next few days were tense. The subtle harassment continued. But I noticed something interesting. Karen's actions seemed to be getting sloppy. The flamingos appeared in the wrong spots. The letters were crumpled. And the suspicious tire tracks weren't as precise as before. It was as if the stress of trying to intimidate me was starting to take a toll on her, and that gave me a small sense of hope. I spent more time outside, working on small improvements to the yard and fence. I wanted the fence to be stronger than ever, not just physically, but as a symbol of calm resilience. Max followed me everywhere, barking at shadows but trusting me to handle anything that came our way. I even started planting extra shrubs along the property line to make it look even nicer, something that would show the neighbors that my intentions were about beautifying, not defying. One night, I went to bed around 10 p.m., exhausted from a long day of work in the yard and keeping an eye on the neighborhood's subtle antics. I felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. I had protected the fence legally. I had remained calm through every provocation. But I knew Karen wasn't done. Her next move would be extreme, and I could sense it in my bones. I woke up in the early hours to a faint sound outside, a scraping, like metal on wood. I froze, listening carefully. Max growled low in his throat. Ears perked, eyes wide. I slipped on my slippers and crept to the window, peering out into the yard. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed movement near the fence. 2 shadows flitted across the yard. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was there, in the middle of the night, touching my property. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, keeping my voice low. The operator instructed me to stay inside and remain calm. I could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching as the intruders noticed the lights coming on and fled into the darkness. The officers arrived within minutes, shining flashlights and taking statements. They found footprints, some fresh, some misleading, and scraps of what looked like tape. Whoever had been there had tried to cover their tracks but left enough evidence to show clear intent. It was no longer just harassment, it had become attempted sabotage. After the officers left, I inspected the fence. The cedar was scratched, a few nails loosened, but structurally, it was sound. I tightened the posts, added a few reinforcements, and installed a security camera I had been meaning to set up. The camera's red light blinked, quietly signaling to anyone thinking of coming back that their actions would be recorded. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of frustration and determination. Karen had crossed a line, but she didn't understand the strength of the fence, both legally and physically. She didn't realize that no amount of intimidation could make me act rashly. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. A few neighbors had seen the flashing lights and the police car and asked questions. I calmly explained that the fence was protected by the county and that attempts to harm it had been thwarted. A few of them nodded, some with surprise, some with admiration. Even those who didn't know all the details seemed to understand that I was standing my ground without being aggressive. Then came the message that would set the tone for the next battle. An anonymous note appeared on my porch, similar to the ones before. But this one was different. It was typed, neat, and threatening. You may have won today, but everyone has a breaking point. Keep your eyes open. I held the note carefully and set it aside. I had no doubt who it was from. Karen's obsession was escalating, and she would likely continue testing boundaries. But unlike before, I didn't feel panic or anger. I felt preparation. Every step she took only confirmed that I was doing the right thing, by staying calm, following the law, and protecting my property. The day passed slowly. Emily helped me plant flowers, Max lay in the shade, and I checked the fence repeatedly, ensuring every plank and nail was secure. As night fell, I added more lighting and made sure the camera angles covered every corner of the property. The fence was standing strong, a physical and legal barrier against Karen's relentless attacks. But just as I started to relax, I noticed a car slowly creeping down the street. Its lights dimmed, moving past houses without stopping. It paused briefly in front of mine. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I knew the message. Karen's surveillance hadn't ended. She wanted me to feel watched, vulnerable, and uncertain. I closed the blinds, taking a deep breath. I had survived harassment, sabotage, and threats. I had remained calm, followed the law, and protected my family. And I knew that whatever Karen tried next, I would be ready. Because the next extreme event was already on its way, and it would change everything in the neighborhood. The following week, tension in Maplewood Grove reached a new level. I had expected Karen to escalate her tactics, but the extent of her obsession surprised even me. Her subtle harassment had turned into a coordinated campaign of intimidation, and now it was visible to everyone in the neighborhood. It seemed as though she wanted to make a public spectacle out of me and my untouchable fence. That Saturday morning, I was in the garage working on a new planter for the front yard when I noticed a gathering across the street. Curious neighbors were standing in small clusters, whispering to one another, and kids peeked from behind bicycles. I frowned, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. Then I saw her. Karen, with her usual pastel cardigan and perfectly pressed slacks, had set up a small table on the sidewalk. On it were flyers, photographs, and charts. She was calling out to neighbors who wandered too close, waving her arms dramatically. Everyone needs to see what's happening. This is what happens when rules are ignored. I stepped outside cautiously. Max trotted to my side, his fur bristling slightly at the energy in the street. I watched as Karen began distributing her materials, pointing at a photo of my fence and shaking her finger. This fence violates neighborhood standards, obstructs sightlines, and sets a dangerous precedent. Who knows what comes next if we let people decide for themselves? A few neighbors paused, unsure whether to approach or stay on the sidelines. I recognized some of them, the ones who had been quiet supporters but feared confrontation. I walked toward her slowly, my voice calm. Karen, may I speak with you for a moment? She looked at me, surprised that I wasn't angry or panicked. No need, Mr. Thompson. Everyone should see this. I nodded at the neighbors, giving a friendly smile. I understand your concerns, everyone, but the facts are simple. This fence is on my property, fully compliant with county regulations, and legally untouchable by the HOA. Karen's face flushed red with frustration. Legal or not, it's a violation of neighborhood trust. I crouched slightly to speak to Max, then back at Karen. Neighborhood trust is important, yes. That's why I've kept my property safe, tidy, and respectful. But intimidation and public shaming don't build trust. Several neighbors exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Karen's face tightened as she realized the support she expected wasn't materializing. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the crowd, and she began muttering under her breath, clearly struggling to regain control. Then came the first extreme escalation of the day. As she waved one of the flyers dramatically, a sudden gust of wind tore it from her hands. The paper flew across the street and landed in the open gutter. Before she could retrieve it, the gust swept the rest of her materials away. Papers scattered across lawns, down driveways, and onto cars. The neighbors stifled laughter, and Karen stood frozen, clutching her table as if it had personally betrayed her. I couldn't help but smile quietly. Nature had delivered a small moment of justice, giving me a brief reprieve in the ongoing tension. But I knew better than to celebrate too early. Karen wasn't done. She would recover from this and escalate further. After the papers settled, I addressed the neighbors again. I've already obtained county approval. I've documented everything, followed all regulations, and ensured this fence is safe. I've tried to be respectful, patient, and calm, and I will continue to do so. A few voices in the crowd spoke up. "We appreciate that," said Mr. Jensen. "It's about keeping the neighborhood safe and orderly. But this seems like personal vendetta rather than concern." Another neighbor added, "It's obvious the fence isn't harming anyone. Maybe we should focus on actual community issues instead of personal grudges." Karen, realizing that her public display had failed spectacularly, stomped her foot and muttered, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." She abruptly packed up her table and stormed down the street, disappearing around a corner. The crowd gradually dispersed, some shaking their heads, others quietly approaching me to apologize for any discomfort the situation had caused. I reassured them, emphasizing that calm and lawfulness were more important than fear or gossip. Later that evening, I reinforced the fence again. Every plank was checked, every post secured, and Max patrolled the perimeter faithfully. The fence was stronger than ever, physically and symbolically. It stood as a testament to patience, preparation, and the quiet power of following the law. Yet I couldn't ignore the sense that Karen's next move would be even more daring. The wind had disrupted her public display, but her determination was far from gone. I knew that the battle wasn't over, it had only changed tactics. The silent siege had transformed into a public spectacle, and I had survived it. But the next extreme event would test my calm and resilience in ways I hadn't yet imagined. Sitting on the porch that night, I watched the fence glow in the moonlight. Its sturdy cedar panels reflected the soft illumination of the new motion sensor lights. I thought about the lessons I had learned. That patience, kindness, and preparation were far stronger than anger, and that even in the face of intimidation, it was possible to remain composed. But deep down, I knew the night ahead would not be peaceful. Karen had moved from subtle harassment to public intimidation, and the next escalation would be unavoidable. I could feel it in my gut, a quiet warning that the next chapter of this battle would bring chaos to the quiet streets of Maplewood Grove. By the time Wednesday rolled around, the tension in Maplewood Grove had reached a fever pitch. Karen's public stunt had failed, yet her determination was more obvious than ever. It was clear she wasn't going to stop, and every subtle harassment, every threat, every attempt at intimidation had only strengthened my resolve. The fence was untouchable legally, but now I knew she was testing my nerves, patience, and vigilance in more extreme ways. I spent the day reinforcing the property. The cedar planks were secured, the posts strengthened, and the motion sensor lights tested and adjusted for maximum coverage. Max patrolled the yard, alert and tense, and Emily helped me plant a few more flowers to keep the garden looking lively despite the growing anxiety. As night fell, the calm of the neighborhood felt almost eerie. Streetlights flickered gently, and the occasional passing car cast fleeting shadows across my yard. I had a feeling this night would be different, a feeling that gnawed at me but didn't scare me. I knew preparation and composure were my best defenses. Around midnight, I was awakened by a strange noise outside, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to open the gate. Max bolted upright, barking furiously, and I grabbed my phone and flashlight. Peering through the blinds, I could see a shadowy figure attempting to manipulate the lock. My pulse quickened, but I stayed calm. This was the moment I had been preparing for. I immediately dialed 911, speaking quietly into the phone. "There's someone at my gate attempting to enter my property," I whispered. The operator assured me that officers were on their way and instructed me to stay inside. Max growled low, following my movements as I crept toward the back door to ensure all entry points were secure. The figure froze as a motion sensor light illuminated the yard, revealing a woman moving cautiously near the fence. Karen. It had to be her, the posture, the clothing, the unmistakable intensity in the shadowed silhouette. She stopped, seemingly aware she had been seen, and slowly backed toward the street. By the time the police arrived, she had vanished, leaving only a faint trail of footprints in the grass. Officers combed the property, taking notes and photographing the scene. They assured me that any further attempts at trespassing would be treated as criminal, not civil, because it involved direct threat to property and personal safety. I filed the report, detailing every prior incident, from banners and flamingos to the nighttime attempts to damage the fence. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread about the midnight incident, and murmurs of concern mixed with curiosity. Some neighbors approached, expressing relief that the fence had held firm and that I had remained calm under pressure. Others asked questions about Karen, wondering if her behavior was normal for HOA leadership. I spent the day securing the yard even further. Additional locks were installed, and the security camera system was upgraded. Every plank of the fence was checked again, the lights tested, and I even added a small motion-activated alarm to ensure any future attempts would trigger immediate attention. Max seemed satisfied, pacing the perimeter confidently, as if understanding that his home and family were safer now than ever. Despite the chaos, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Emily and I planted more flowers in the front yard, chatting quietly and laughing over small jokes. It reminded me that life wasn't just about conflict, it was also about resilience, patience, and creating joy, even when surrounded by tension. I wanted to show her that calm, measured action could triumph over chaos and intimidation. But the calm didn't last. Karen's next move was already unfolding, though I didn't know it yet. The subtle intimidation had become bold, the public harassment had become direct, and now she was escalating toward something extreme. I had faced banners, flamingos, threats, fire attempts, and midnight trespassing. Each time, I had stayed calm, stayed legal, and stayed kind. But the next act would be the most shocking yet. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed a small crowd gathering down the street. Flashing lights reflected off their faces, and I recognized some neighbors holding smartphones, whispering and pointing toward my yard. Max growled at the street, alerting me to the rising tension. Then, I saw it, Karen, standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac with a microphone and a small speaker. She was setting up for some kind of spectacle, a performance meant to intimidate and humiliate me in front of the neighborhood. The banners were back, the flyers ready, and the dramatic gestures in place. I realized in that instant that this would be the ultimate test. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about patience, calmness, and standing up to relentless aggression without losing composure. As I stepped onto the porch, Max at my side, I took a deep breath. I knew that the extreme event about to unfold would push all of us to the edge, and I had to be ready. By the time Friday evening rolled around, Maplewood Grove had become a tense stage for what felt like a dramatic showdown. Karen had clearly escalated her campaign to a new level. Her public displays, midnight trespassing, and subtle harassment had culminated in tonight's event, a spectacle meant to intimidate not just me, but the entire neighborhood. Yet, despite the tension, I felt calm. I had prepared, reinforced, and documented everything. I had patience, law, and strategy on my side. I spent the late afternoon checking every corner of the property. The fence was in perfect condition. All planks secure, posts reinforced, and motion sensor lights tested and positioned for maximum coverage. Max patrolled alongside me, nose to the ground, ears alert. Emily helped me tidy the garden, arranging flowers so the yard looked inviting and well cared for. Even in the midst of escalating harassment, I wanted to show that calmness, kindness, and respect could still flourish. As twilight approached, I noticed the neighborhood gathering subtly. Cars lined the streets, and clusters of neighbors whispered and pointed, curious and slightly anxious. Some had cameras, while others merely wanted to witness what Karen had planned. It was clear that she intended this to be the ultimate public confrontation, the crescendo of her long campaign against me. Then I saw her, Karen, standing near the cul-de-sac, microphone in hand, a small portable speaker at her feet. Behind her was a banner that read in garish letters, "Rule Breaker Alert. See what happens when laws are ignored." She gestured dramatically to the crowd as she began speaking, her voice booming and deliberately theatrical. Neighbors. Look at what one resident dares to do. Ignoring rules, disregarding standards, and flaunting authority. I stepped onto my porch, Max at my side, taking a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone," I called out calmly. "I'd like to clarify something. This fence is on my property, fully legal, and approved by the county. All actions I've taken have been documented and compliant with the law. That is the truth, not the rumors you've heard." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors looked impressed, others looked skeptical. Karen's face twisted with frustration. She had expected spectacle and outrage, not calm clarity. She tried to regain control. "Truth? This is a violation. It's dangerous. It's disrespectful to the neighborhood." She waved her arms dramatically, pointing at the fence as if the cedar planks themselves were guilty. I smiled gently. Respect for the neighborhood isn't about shouting or threatening. Respect is about following laws, maintaining safety, and showing kindness. That's what I've done. And that's what this fence represents: lawfulness, patience, and calmness in the face of unnecessary conflict. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Neighbors began speaking up. "It's a nice fence," one said. "No danger here," added another. The momentum was shifting. Karen's authority in front of the neighbors, the spectacle she had relied on, was faltering. Then came the extreme event, the ultimate escalation. Karen, clearly desperate to reclaim control, stomped toward the fence, waving her arms in fury. In her haste, she tripped over a low garden border, knocking over the speaker, which sent a small electrical spark flying. The crowd gasped, a few people instinctively stepping back, while I rushed forward to ensure no one was hurt. Karen scrambled up, flustered and embarrassed, glaring at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. I calmly spoke to her and the neighbors. "I hope everyone saw what happens when we act impulsively. Safety and calmness matter more than drama. Max and I are fine. And the fence still untouchable and secure. As always." Some of the neighbors chuckled quietly. Others nodded in relief. Karen, now red-faced and flustered, gathered her banners and equipment in silence. She muttered threats under her breath but left the area without another public display. That night, I checked the fence once more, inspecting every plank, post, and nail. Max paced the perimeter, satisfied that all was secure. Emily and I sat on the porch, reflecting on the events of the day. The fence had withstood harassment, sabotage, and public spectacle, proving that patience, preparation, and legal grounding were stronger than intimidation. I realized then that the battle with Karen had taught more than just resilience. It had reinforced the importance of calmness, empathy, and measured action. By remaining composed, following the law, and treating others with kindness, even in the face of relentless hostility, I had not only protected my property but also modeled a way to handle conflict with dignity. Yet, as I watched the lights of the neighborhood flicker in the distance, I understood one thing clearly. Karen's obsession was far from over. But the ultimate standoff had shown everyone, including her, that intimidation would not prevail against patience, preparation, and unwavering calm. The days following Karen's public meltdown felt almost surreal. The neighborhood had witnessed the ultimate confrontation, and the tension that had haunted Maplewood Grove for weeks began to ease. Karen had not returned to make another spectacle, and the subtle harassment that had plagued me from flamingos to midnight trespassing had stopped. For the first time in what felt like months, the yard, the fence, and the neighborhood finally felt calm. I spent the morning checking the fence one last time, tightening posts, ensuring nails were flush, and confirming that the motion sensor lights were functioning perfectly. Max ran along the perimeter, sniffing every corner and wagging his tail, as if sensing that the battle had finally ended. Emily planted a few more flowers near the gate, laughing as a butterfly landed on her hand. It was a peaceful moment, one I felt we had earned after weeks of tension and fear. The neighborhood, too, seemed to have shifted. Neighbors waved as they passed, some stopping to chat about the events of the past few weeks. Mr. Jensen mentioned he had never seen someone maintain such calm under pressure, and Mrs. Patel smiled, noting that standing firm with kindness had set an example for everyone. Even casual passers-by commented on how beautiful and well-kept the yard looked, proof that patience and persistence paid off. Karen's absence was notable, and while I didn't expect her to return immediately, I remained cautious. I reinforced the fence one final time, adding a few extra planks for peace of mind, and reviewed the camera footage from previous nights. It showed every subtle move she had made, every attempt to intimidate, and now it stood as a clear record of everything that had occurred. I stored it safely, knowing it might be needed for future protection, but also as a reminder of how far we had come. That evening, I sat on the porch with Emily and Max, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The golden light bathed the cedar fence, illuminating its strength and permanence. I reflected on everything that had happened: the banners, the flamingos, the midnight trespassing, the fire, the public displays, and the ultimate standoff. Each challenge had tested my patience, empathy, and resilience. But it had also taught me something profound about life and human nature. I realized that kindness and calmness were not weaknesses. They were armor. By remaining composed, showing respect to neighbors and even to someone like Karen, and following the law meticulously, I had not only protected my property but also preserved my peace of mind. The fence, once a source of conflict, had become a symbol of endurance, wisdom, and the power of measured action. Later that night, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and Max lay at my feet, finally relaxing. Emily fell asleep under the soft glow of the porch light, exhausted but content. I sipped my coffee slowly, appreciating the serenity that had finally returned. The neighborhood had learned something too: that patience and integrity could outlast drama, intimidation, and chaos. Just as I leaned back in my chair, a faint knock echoed from the front gate. I tensed for a moment, unsure whether it was another harassment attempt. Slowly, I walked toward the gate and opened it. To my surprise, it was a small basket of flowers with a note attached. I picked it up carefully and read the words: "Sometimes we don't realize the strength in calmness and patience until it's tested. Thank you for showing the neighborhood the way." No signature. No clue who had left it. But the gesture felt like a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps from a neighbor who had been watching. Perhaps even a subtle sign that Karen herself had retreated, recognizing the futility of her aggression. The fence, untouchable and resilient, now stood not only as protection but as a testament to perseverance and integrity. I placed the flowers near the garden and sat down with Max, feeling a sense of closure. The struggle had been intense, filled with highs and lows, moments of fear and frustration, but it had also revealed something far more important than any conflict: the strength that comes from remaining calm, lawful, and kind, even in the face of relentless pressure. As the night deepened, the neighborhood was quiet. The streetlights flickered gently, casting soft shadows across the cedar fence. I realized that Maplewood Grove had returned to its peaceful rhythm, but now it was stronger. Residents had witnessed a demonstration of resilience, empathy, and courage, lessons they would carry long after Karen's shadow had faded. And while Karen's presence had dominated our lives for weeks, her departure marked more than just an end to harassment. It was a confirmation that patience, preparation, and kindness could outlast even the most persistent and aggressive opposition. The fence had survived, my family had survived, and the neighborhood had survived stronger, wiser, and more united than before. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's amazing to see how far this story of patience, resilience, and kindness has reached.